News one Sunday evening in November in rainy Seattle, Washington, as weather reports all week persistently warned of an approaching atmospheric river. Nature unleashed its full power. By evening, the usual rain had turned into a full-blown storm, pouring torrents of water onto the city. The wind furiously whipped the branches of an old maple tree growing in front of the house in the Ballard neighborhood. Seeking coziness and warmth, the narrator made herself a cup of fragrant tea, plugged her phone into the charger, and immersed herself in listening to a podcast dedicated to fascinating true crime stories. It seemed like the perfect night to stay home and enjoy the solitude. At approximately 9:30 p.m., the silence was shattered by a sudden and deafening sound. A heavy, dull thud echoed from the direction of the front door. It wasn't a normal knock, but rather resembled a collision, as if someone had tripped over the threshold or run into the door with their shoulder. Time twos. Intrigued and slightly alarmed, the narrator paused the podcast and got up. Soon another thud followed, accompanied by a rattling sound that made her heart pound. Cautiously approaching the door, she peered through the peephole. The bright porch light illuminated the space in front of the entrance. Streams of rain flowed from the roof, forming a solid curtain of water. A man stood on the top step, soaked to the bone. His jacket clung tightly to his body, and water streamed from his dark hair. He didn't have an umbrella, and he appeared to be about 35 years old. He kept looking around, as if nervous and wary of something. Noticing the shadow at the door, he leaned closer to the wood and said loud enough to be heard through the door, "My phone is dead. Please let me in to charge it. I'm soaked." Despite his plea, the narrator wisely kept the deadbolt locked. She was confident in the strength of her door, equipped with a sturdy quick-release deadbolt and a metal strike plate, which she had installed herself after a series of car thefts in their neighborhood the previous year. In addition, she had a Ring doorbell installed, aimed at the steps, providing an extra layer of security. "I can call someone for you," she offered through the door. "Give me the number, and I'll call for help." Upon hearing these words, the man's expression instantly changed. The pleading look turned into indifference. He blinked slowly and then reached for the doorknob. Watching his actions through the peephole, the narrator saw the lever move. He tried to open the door once, then again, applying more force. The deadbolt held, but the entire door flexed slightly in the frame. "Don't do that," she said, trying to keep her voice calm. "I'm calling 911 right now." In response, the man stared into the peephole, as if trying to see her. His jaw tightened. Then he stepped back and placed both hands on the handle. He turned it and pulled. The door creaked. The narrator recoiled and grabbed her phone from the hallway table. She dialed 911. A dispatcher from the Seattle Police Department answered the call. Giving her address, she explained that some man, behaving erratically, was trying to open her front door during the storm. The dispatcher requested a description of the stranger. The narrator reported that he was wearing a dark jacket, had dark hair, no hat, no umbrella, and was soaked to the bone. The dispatcher told her to stay inside, keep the door locked, and stay on the line. Although all units were busy with weather-related calls, the dispatcher assured her that help was on the way. The man stopped fiddling with the handle. For a moment, it seemed to the narrator that he might leave, but instead, he disappeared from the view of the peephole. She checked her phone screen and opened the Ring app. The camera showed him standing at the edge of the porch, looking over the railing into her yard. He wiped the water from his face and surveyed the windows. Then he picked up an empty Amazon box that she hadn't had time to break down yet and used it as a shield from the rain. As he headed toward the side gate, she switched the latch on the back door, even though it was already locked. For added security, she inserted a wooden dowel into the groove of the sliding glass door. In the kitchen, she turned on the motion sensor. Through the blinds, she saw his shadow moving along the fence. The gate latch clicked. He jiggled it a few times and then pushed. The gate creaked open. "The gate is open," she told the dispatcher. "He's in the yard." Suddenly, the lights flickered. The clock on the microwave went out and came back on. The rain was coming down even harder. She walked into the hallway to see both the kitchen and the front door. Her heart was pounding in her ears. She held the phone so the dispatcher could still hear her. The man approached the sliding glass door and put his hands on the glass to peer inside. He noticed the dowel in the groove and tried to lift the door, as if he knew how to open sliding doors. It rattled, but the stick held it in place. He tried the handle again and again. Then he pressed his forehead against the glass, as if listening. Stepping back, he looked around and then disappeared from view toward the side yard. At that moment, her neighbor Megan, who lived across the street, sent her a message. "Are you okay? There's some guy on your porch." The narrator replied that he was now in her yard and that she had called 911. Megan reported that her husband was standing at the window with a camera and that she was also calling the police. The dispatcher remained on the line. "Officers are on their way," she said. "They'll be there in a few minutes. Are you still in a safe place?" "Yes," the narrator replied. "Both the front and back doors are locked. He's out of sight." Again, there were footsteps on the side path. Then the boards on the porch groaned. He was at the door again. He pounded on it twice with his fist. The door shook in the frame. In a desperate attempt to somehow strengthen the defense, the narrator moved a small table from the hallway to the door, realizing that it wouldn't stop a serious attack, but hoping to create some kind of barrier. He jiggled the handle harder than before. The metal screeched. He began to breathe so loudly that the narrator could hear it through the door. "Go away! The police are on their way!" she shouted. "I'm not opening this door!" He leaned closer to the peephole. She saw one eye and streaks of rain on his cheek. He smiled without a trace of humor. "Open it," he said in a quiet voice. "I saw you." But she didn't answer. I remained silent. Time seemed to stand still. Suddenly, an unpleasant dryness arose in her mouth. A gust of wind forcefully poured torrents of rain onto the porch. Somewhere nearby, a car alarm emitted two short signals and then turned into a continuous wail. Perhaps it was Megan's husband trying to create noise with his key fob. The guest abruptly turned his head toward the sound, frozen, listening to what was happening. Then he casually threw the empty Amazon box, stepped back, and quickly went down the steps. The Ring camera captured his hasty escape, the sound of shoes slapping on the wet sidewalk. I informed the dispatcher that the stranger had left. She strictly warned me not to open the door and to wait for the police to arrive. I remained standing, watching what was happening through the peephole. My breathing quickened, causing painful sensations in my chest. The rain continued to relentlessly pound on the roof of the house. About 5 minutes later, flashing lights were reflected in the wet streets. 2 Seattle police officers approached the porch. Before slightly opening the door on the chain, I carefully checked the recordings from the Ring camera to make sure of their uniform and service vehicle. Then I removed the chain and let them in. They too were soaked to the bone. Questions were asked clearly and in order: time, description, what he said, and what he touched. I showed them the Ring camera footage on my phone and emailed it at their request. One of the officers with a flashlight thoroughly examined the fence line and the backyard. Returning, he reported that he had found shoe prints in the mud and fresh scuff marks on the sliding door rails. He wrote the case number on a card and handed it to me. I asked if there had been any similar reports tonight. He nodded affirmatively, specifying that calls had come from Finney Ridge and Greenwood. The scenario was the same: heavy rain, power outages, a stranger asking to come in to charge his phone. Upon refusal, he checked door handles and gates. No arrests had yet been made. On such inclement nights, when it's pouring rain and the power goes out, many perpetrators believe they are being watched less. After they left, I stood by the window for a long time, lost in thought. The tea had long since cooled. The house seemed unusually small and quiet. Every time gusts of wind pressed the maple branches against the siding of the house, I involuntarily flinched. I relocked the window frames, although they were already locked. I closed the peephole with the small latch that I had never used before. The night was restless. I constantly heard someone scratching at the door handle. Around 3 in the morning, the rain subsided, turning into a monotonous hiss. Finally, I dozed off on the couch under the silent screen of the television. During my time in college, I keenly felt my difference from others. I am Muslim, and although most people around me treated me with respect, there were always those who didn't. 2 brothers in particular stood out, constantly reminding me of their cruelty. They weren't just my classmates, but real shadows, haunting me throughout my studies. At every opportunity, they called me a terrorist, mocking me in front of their friends and turning my religion into a subject of ridicule. Each time it hurt, but I tried to ignore them. What angered me most was the truth about their own family. Everyone in town knew that their parents were in prison, serving time for multiple murders. It wasn't a rumor, but an undeniable fact. And yet they tried to pin some disgusting label on me, as if their own name wasn't already tarnished. In most cases, I tried to ignore them. There were kind people around me who defended me when these brothers crossed the line, and I found solace in their support. But their words haunted me, and I will never forget how their eyes lit up when they managed to make me flinch. Home was my refuge. I lived with my parents in a quiet suburb. Our house was small but cozy and safe. At least, that's what it seemed to me then. The nights in our neighborhood were calm. The soft orange light of a few streetlights illuminated the sidewalk, and only passing cars broke the silence for a moment. I loved those nights when time seemed to slow down. After dinner, my parents usually went to bed early, and I stayed in my room, reading, doing assignments, or just browsing my phone until my eyes started to close. One night, everything started as usual. I was lying on my bed, and the ceiling fan was humming quietly above me. The phone screen illuminated my face as I absent-mindedly scrolled through the feed, too tired to focus on anything serious. Outside the window, the world froze. Midnight came. The streets emptied. The curtains were tightly drawn, and only the faint light of a streetlight penetrated through the cracks, disturbing the darkness in my room. That's when I first heard it. At first, the sound was so faint that I mistook it for part of a dream, a whisper, quiet and muffled, as if someone was muttering right behind the wall. Lifted my head from the pillow, holding my breath. The sound subsided and then appeared again. Too distinct, too close. I put down my phone and sat up, straining my ears. It wasn't my parents. I could hear their even breathing from the hallway, as I always left the door ajar for the night. It was something else. This case was extraordinary. Suddenly, the whisper dissipated, giving way to a different sound. 3 distinct taps echoed on the glass of my bedroom window. I involuntarily froze, tensing every muscle, as if preparing to jump. An icy chill seemed to grip the room, but it wasn't just the cold air, but a piercing fear that crept under my skin. I tried to find a rational explanation, suggesting that it could be a tree branch, but there wasn't a single tree growing near the window, and the tapping was too precise, as if someone was deliberately tapping with their nails or knuckles. Slowly, cautiously, I turned my head toward the blinds. Behind them, a barely discernible shadow flickered. My heart pounded. Blood throbbed in my temples. I wanted to call my father for help, but some part of me ordered me to first make sure of what was happening. Overcoming the primal fear, I got out of bed and carefully approached the window, each step accompanied by a quiet creak of the floorboards. With trembling fingers, I reached for the blinds and opened them, just an inch. What I saw left me speechless. Pressed close to the glass was a face, staring directly at me. The dim light of the streetlight snatched a sickly glow from the darkness. It was a face distorted by a grimace. It was hidden under a clown mask. The wide, painted mouth was frozen in an unnatural, sinister grin, and the deep black circles around the eyes made the gaze piercing and empty. But in the depths of those eye sockets, I saw real eyes, fixed on me. I recoiled, involuntarily letting out a muffled gasp, but then I noticed something else. A little further away in the shadows stood a second figure, taller and broader. It, too, wore a clown mask, and its head was tilted slightly, as if waiting. The picture of what had happened instantly formed in my head. Even under the masks, I recognized them. It was Jack and his brother, the very ones who had mocked me in college, but now they had moved from words to deeds. They were standing at my house. Fear burst out in the form of a piercing scream. An uncontrolled, panicked sound cut through the night silence of the house. The masked face at the window abruptly recoiled, and I heard hurried footsteps moving away across the grass. The door to my bedroom burst open almost instantly. My father stood on the threshold, his eyes wide with anxiety, asking what had happened. Following him, my mother rushed into the room, her face pale with worry. I could barely point to the window, my hands shaking violently. My father swiftly approached the window and raised the blinds all the way. He looked out, into the street, but there was no one there. 2 sinister figures had dissolved into the darkness, leaving only the shimmering light of the street light and the quiet rustle of leaves in the distance. I collapsed on the edge of the bed, trying to catch my breath. My mother hugged me tightly around the shoulders, trying to calm me, but the fear did not recede. I could still feel their gazes on me, still hear the tapping on the glass. My father, without wasting time, grabbed the phone and called the police. The minutes of waiting seemed endless. Finally, red and blue flashing lights illuminated the walls of my room. Police officers with flashlights searched the yard, their beams piercing the night darkness. They crouched under my window, examining the soft ground. I heard one of them say that he had found indistinct footprints. When they entered the house, I told them everything, how I recognized the attackers, despite the masks, and how they had mocked me in college. The next day, the police questioned the brothers, but, as expected, they denied everything. They claimed that they had spent that night in the library, preparing for exams until late at night. Of course, no evidence was found, and since they had not entered the house or caused any damage, the police confined themselves to issuing a warning. After that incident, the brothers began to avoid me. In college, they never looked my way, didn't say a word, and never tried to bother me again. I was commissioned from the army 6 months shy of 8 years of service. I had seen Afghanistan and Iraq, character-building places. Returning to civilian life proved challenging. My head was a mess, so I decided to clear my head by taking a solo hike on the Appalachian Trail in Virginia, near Shenandoah National Park. It's a famous area, over 2,000 miles long, but I picked a secluded stretch away from the tourist routes. Just me, my pack, and the woods. I needed the quiet. Early June was sunny, the temperature hovering around 75 degrees. I left my pickup in the trailhead parking area, just off Skyline Drive, locked it, and started hiking around 7 in the morning. The trail was narrow and winding, through thick pine forests and rocky sections. Birds were singing, squirrels were scampering, and the air was filled with the scent of earth and pine needles. I had a light pack with water, food, a first aid kit, and a hunting knife. My Remington 700 .308 bolt-action rifle stayed back at the cabin I rented 5 miles away. I'm a hunter and always prepared, but I didn't think I'd need a weapon on a day hike. By noon I had covered about 8 miles and stopped at a clear stream to refill my water. I was kneeling, splashing water on my face, when I heard footsteps, faint about 100 yards back, the crunch of leaves underfoot. I turned, expecting to see another hiker, but no one was there. Just trees and an empty trail stretching back into the distance. I figured I was hearing things. Army training makes a person overly cautious. You see threats everywhere. I took a drink, stood up, and continued on my way. The footsteps didn't stop. They matched my pace, step for step. I sped up. They sped up too. I slowed down. They slowed down too. It was creepy, like an echo that shouldn't be there. Around 3 p.m., I had to stop again, heart pounding. "Hello!" I shouted into the void. Only silence answered. I scanned the surrounding woods, but saw nothing but the strange play of shadows and thickets of ferns. Deciding to continue, I felt the sensation of someone's gaze intensify. Years of experience in combat zones had taught me to recognize this feeling. It was the same shiver running down my spine. Around 6,000 p.m., dusk began to settle. The sun, disappearing behind the mountain ridges, painted the sky in bright orange and purple hues. The shadows grew long and ominous, merging with the forest undergrowth. The sounds of footsteps seemed to have drawn closer, now coming from about 50 yards behind. I stopped abruptly and turned, but the trail was empty. My pulse echoed in my ears with a persistent thud. "Who's there?" I called out, but only the rustle of leaves driven by the wind answered. Gripping my water bottle tighter in my hand, I regretted not bringing my rifle. Quickening my pace, I broke into a light jog. It was at that moment that the strange rustling noises began. They weren't coming from the trail, but from my right, from the thick underbrush. Twigs snapped, leaves rustled, as if someone was moving parallel to me. I glanced in that direction and noticed some movement in the ferns. A dark figure flashed and disappeared immediately. My stomach turned cold. Who was it? A deer, a bear, but animals wouldn't move in step with a human. Deer usually run away, and bears lumber clumsily from side to side. This movement seemed human, deliberate, as if someone was trying to copy my actions while remaining out of sight. I called out again, "Show yourself!" Silence answered. The rustling noises began to come from my left as well. It seemed like two people were surrounding me. NUS professional training kicked in instantly. Assess, act, survive. I sprinted forward, backpack bouncing against my spine, boots thudding heavily on the ground. The cabin was about 5 miles away, and I wasn't planning on stopping. The sounds persisted. Footsteps behind me, rustling on both sides, like something was nipping at my heels. Sweat stung my eyes. I tripped over a tree root, scraping my knee raw, blood welling up, but I was back on my feet instantly, heart hammering in my chest. This wasn't just my imagination. The woods felt alive, hostile. Every shadow seemed like a sinister figure. Every snap of a dry twig sounded like a threat. Stories began to surface in my mind. Hikers stalked by drifters, strange people living far from civilization. The Appalachian Trail was vast, and there were plenty of secluded places to hide. My mind raced, searching for an explanation. Maybe it was some local trying to mess with me, a hunter, or something worse. I didn't know, and I wasn't going to wait to find out. Finally, around 7:00 p.m., I burst onto the dirt road that led to the cabin. The trailhead was just up ahead, and in the fading light, I could make out my truck. Without wasting a second, I ran to the cabin, a small one-room structure I had rented. Inside was a bed, a small kitchenette, and a bathroom. There was no cell service, but I had a satellite messenger for emergencies. Fumbling in my pocket for the key, I unlocked the door, slammed it shut behind me, and slid the deadbolt. Leaning against the door, I tried to catch my breath, my pulse still racing. Once I felt secure, I grabbed the rifle from the corner, checked the action, and loaded it, preparing for the worst. I heated up some canned chili, trying to calm myself, but my hands still trembled. An old sitcom flickered on the television, but I barely registered the sounds. My eyes kept darting to the windows, the curtains drawn just enough to see what was happening outside in the moonlight. I kept trying to convince myself it was over. Maybe it was just an animal, or my mind, weary from years of war, playing tricks on me. Around 10,000 p.m., I went to bed. I turned off the lights and placed the rifle on the nightstand. I slept lightly, as always. At 2:32 a.m., I woke up. The numbers on the clock glowed red. There were footsteps outside, slow, deliberate, crunching on the gravel around the cabin. A chill ran down my spine. Holding my breath, I listened intently. The footsteps circled the house, then stopped at the window next to my bed. The thin curtains barely filtered the moonlight. Slowly turning my head, I saw a silhouette. A tall, hooded figure stood just outside the glass, watching me. I couldn't see a face, just a shadow, still as a predator sizing up its prey. My heart pounded in my chest, threatening to burst. Reaching for the rifle, I quietly chambered around. The footsteps moved again, toward the door. I rolled off the bed, crouched low, raised the rifle, and crept to the door. Throwing the deadbolt, I yanked the door open. The figure, clad in dark clothing and a hood, stood about 20 feet away in the yard. The stranger froze, then bolted, running toward the woods. Instinct took over. I raised the rifle and fired 2 warning shots into the air above his head. The sound of the gunshots echoed through the surrounding area, sharp and unmistakable. The stranger crashed through the underbrush, snapping branches in his wake, and then disappeared. I slammed the door shut, bolted it, and backed away, keeping the rifle trained on the entrance. Grabbing the satellite phone, I called 911. The police arrived around 4:30 a.m. 2 sheriff's deputies, flashlights in hand, searched the woods thoroughly, finding tracks, large, man-sized boot prints, but no one. They speculated it could have been a drifter, a poacher, or some recluse living off the grid. After advising me to stay vigilant, they left. I didn't sleep another wink. At daybreak, I packed my things and left. I never saw him again. I still enjoy hiking, but now I always go with company. The army taught me to trust my gut. That wasn't an animal. Someone was stalking me, watching me, wanting something. I don't know what, and I'm not going back to find out.